Broadcasting from Detroit's Cass Corridor, it's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. Today on the show, we're tracing the shape of change across our region, how power moves, who gets heard, and what we should choose to build together.
In rural Michigan, fields of corn and soy are becoming battlegrounds over the build-out of data centers.
Some see promise. Others see rising electric bills, wasted water, and a familiar story of big industry rewriting local rules.
Then we travel back to Detroit, where 18 square miles of open land sit waiting for a vision. Detroit Future City believes the answer is a new green space conservancy.
Later, the arena lights shift. Sports and gambling have become inseparable. Longtime sports journalist Jamel Hill helps us navigate the latest scandal shaking the NBA.
And finally, Detroit Theater Collective, a host of people, stakes new ground on the city's west side, expanding the creative possibilities of the neighborhood and the city.
This is the Metro, where we follow transformation in our region and the people shaping that change.
We begin in rural communities across the state, where Michigan is racing toward the data center boom that's powering artificial intelligence and cloud computing. Lawmakers have approved generous tax breaks, and utilities are courting multi-billion-dollar projects, including a proposed $7 billion hyperscale campus in rural Saline Township. It's backed by tech giants like OpenAI and Oracle. Supporters promise investment and new tax revenue, but critics warn that these vast windowless buildings could come with higher electric bills, heavy demands on local water supplies, and pressure to keep fossil fuel plants running long past Michigan's clean energy deadlines. So today, we're asking, who really pays for Michigan's data center gold rush, and who gets to decide? Brian Allnutt is a senior reporter and contributing editor at Planet Detroit. He's been following Michigan's data center deals from the state capitol to township board meetings and courtroom settlements. He's been tracing what they mean for residents, rural communities, and the Great Lakes. He joins me now. Brian, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So let's start with the data centers themselves, if we could. What is a data center and what happens inside these buildings?
So a data center is essentially a large warehouse full of servers, and pretty much everything we do on the internet requires a data center to some extent. But the reason we're seeing this really massive build out of data centers right now is because of artificial intelligence.
And why are tech companies so interested in building these facilities here in Michigan?
Michigan is attractive because of our cool climate and plentiful cool water. And that's important because the servers in these buildings get really hot. So having relatively cool air and a lot of water to use in cooling systems is really important. Michigan also passed tax breaks for large data centers in 2025. And then, just also a lot of land. And we tend to be seeing these projects coming to areas around Grand Rapids and Ann Arbor where there's land available, but also you're relatively close to airports and large labor pools, which seems to be important.
You've described this as a kind of data center gold rush, and you mentioned that the state law changed this year to open the door. Talk a little bit more about that. So tax breaks were passed and signed into law by Governor Whitmer at the beginning of the year. This was, met with pushback from environmental groups and ratepayer advocates who said there were, insufficient protections. There was some language in those tax break laws requiring facilities getting the tax breaks to hook up to municipal water.
and not to push costs from connecting the facilities to the grid onto ratepayers. But some of that language was pretty vague, so it's really the devil is in the details.
What do those tax breaks mean in concrete terms? I mean, in other words, what are companies saving?
I don't know if I can give you a hard number on how much money that's going to save companies. I'm also not totally sure how essential that is. Some lawmakers have suggested that in terms of the size of these companies and the things that are bringing them to Michigan, the tax breaks might not really be that necessary, considering how attractive the state is for these investments.
I see. And at the same time, then, what are local governments potentially giving up here?
When you say what are local governments,
what's
what do you mean?
What's the trade-off here for local governments?
Well, I think what local governments could receive is a lot of money in property taxes, which could, help fund schools and other local services. What residents are concerned about is that this could really change, the look of these rural townships. Residents are also worried about, the water demands affecting, local wells, and then just that, the massive energy demands could put a strain on the grid.
Let's zoom in a little bit more on some of the residents who are really concerned. And I want to look specifically at Saline Township, where this $7 billion Stargate project is planned. I mean, how did a quiet farming community end up at the center of Michigan's first big data center fight?
I think that kind of comes back to this, this issue of why these areas might be attractive, and that seems to be connected to being relatively close to airports and pools of labor, and also having land available.
Now, the township board initially rejected rezoning the farmland and then faced a lawsuit from the developer. I mean, what did that legal battle look like, and how did it lead to the settlement you reported on?
Well, yeah, so the township board was under a lot of pressure to reject the rezoning. Really big turnouts at these meetings, with most of the people opposed to the initiative or opposed to the project. And so they voted against it. And then just days later, Related Digital and landowners sued. The lawyers for the township held another meeting, and they said, essentially the township could be on the hook for monetary damages. And they referenced a case in northern Michigan where that had happened, and a township had a judgment of $50 million against them. So that, I think really scared people in the township that they could be on the hook for that much money. And eventually they agreed to a settlement, where they did get some significant community benefits, something like $15 million for local services.
Now, you've spoken with residents, some opposed, some selling their land. What are you hearing from both sides of those conversations?
Well, and, I would say by and large, in all of the townships I've reported on, there is just a lot of resistance. I think some of the officials are touting the the economic benefits that, these could, really dramatically increase tax revenue for townships that don't always have a lot of money. But residents are concerned about a lot of things, including noise. Water is always a big thing in Michigan. And then just that this could raise energy rates and increase energy reliability problems, which are already an issue in a lot of the state.
This is The Metro on WDET. I'm Robyn Vincent. My guest is reporter Brian Allnutt with Planet Detroit. He's been closely tracking the rise of data centers across Michigan. We're talking about how these projects are reshaping debates over electricity, water, local control, and the promises of economic development. Brian, what does the resistance to this look like? I know that there have been a lot of folks attending long town halls, ones that stretch late into the evening, if not the morning hours. What are they saying? How else is that resistance translating right now?
We're seeing some really dramatic turnout. I think that was the Howell Township town hall that, went on for something like 7 or 8 hours. I think that group got, several thousand signups to their Facebook group in a matter of days when people first found out about the data center proposal. So it really is pretty dramatic. And then, in Augusta Township, residents were so dissatisfied with the decision to rezone land and allow for the data center that they started a petition drive and got enough signatures to put a question about the rezoning on an upcoming ballot. And that's been something I've heard discussed in other townships as well, potentially doing ballot drives if these projects move forward.
I want to think a little bit more deeply about some of the concerns that are driving this kind of resistance. I mean, some people look at the Great Lakes and they might assume water isn't an issue here, that Michigan can easily handle whatever cooling demand data centers bring. But Brian, your reporting shows that the real pressures play out at the local level in specific aquifers and wells and in watersheds. Could you explain what the actual water risks are for communities where these facilities are being proposed?
Yeah, so environmental advocates are probably less concerned in areas where the local water systems are using Great Lakes water. But in a lot of places in Michigan, the water system uses groundwater, and groundwater isn't mapped very well. We don't necessarily, understand how much groundwater we have and where. And data centers can use millions of gallons a day. I've seen numbers in Michigan that are like 1 or 2 million gallons a day. And they're using that water to cool the servers. And so if they use evaporative cooling, they use more water. In Saline Township, the developer, kind of listening to resident pressure, decided to use a less water-intensive cooling system, but that just is going to mean that the data center is going to use more energy. So it's always a trade-off. But if they are using that much water, then it could pose a threat to people who rely on these municipal systems or rely on wells that are drawing on that same source of groundwater source. And we have seen places in Michigan in recent years where wells have run dry.
I want to fix our gaze on another state to see what kinds of clues we might be able to learn about what this data center boom could mean for Michigan. In Virginia, data centers have grown into one of the most concentrated clusters in the country, and they already use a significant share of the state's electricity. That growth has helped drive major grid investments and proposals for new gas plants. Brian, when you look at that experience, what lessons or warnings from Virginia feel most relevant to Michigan right now?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. So Virginia, that's home to Data Center Alley, which may be the largest concentration of data centers in the world. And what that's meant is that Dominion Energy, one of the major utilities there, has kept a coal plant online. They've proposed a new natural gas plant. That could mean that the state might not meet its climate goals. And it's caused other problems as well. These large data centers often have dozens of extremely large diesel generators that they will use if there's a power outage, if power goes offline for some reason. So that's raised concerns about air quality. And, I think one of the things that advocates in Virginia have told me is that the fact that the permitting is done for these facilities at the local level is a problem because, the township next to yours might approve a data center and be getting a lot of property taxes for it.
Yeah.
But if you're living next door, you have no say over that. And so you might be dealing with all these, impacts to energy reliability and to air quality, but not having any say. And so they've suggested that the permitting should be moved to the state level, although I imagine that would be kind of controversial in Michigan, where a lot of people are already resistant to the fact that the state is doing renewable energy permitting at the state level.
Sure, a local versus state control here, but it sounds like some of these advocates are making the argument that municipalities are really not necessarily equipped to be doing this kind of permitting, that this is just too foreign, too new of a process?
And that's a recurring theme in this reporting is that, these townships are considering massive projects and they don't necessarily have the resources to do the kind of environmental reviews or water studies or things of that nature that are needed to assess the impacts of these facilities, let alone be able to muster the resources to match these, tech giants resources for, legal and things like that.
We've been talking a lot about the environmental costs. For just a moment, I want to talk about the monetary costs. You've reported that a single large facility could push residential electric bills up by 5 to 10% if protections aren't in place. How might that happen?
So the way that this could impact energy costs, there's a couple things. And, the first issue is the issue of stranded assets. So if a utility needs to build out new generation or other infrastructure to hook up a data center, and then, that facility ends up leaving in a couple years before those investments are paid off, then those investments could be dropped on other ratepayers, so potentially your residential power bill. Recent case that was considered by the Michigan Public Service Commission for consumers' energy provided some protections for ratepayers, but that's only for consumers' energy customers. The other big issue is just the cost allocation. And so, if a new power plant is built to service data centers, then traditionally that cost would be shared by, all the other ratepayers. But with the massive amount of investments that might be needed for that, advocates are saying that that's really not fair to have, residential, commercial, or other industrial ratepayers paying the cost for this more expensive new generation when it's really only needed because of the data center.
Brian, before I let you go, I want to think about the other side of this, because critics argue that data centers bring few long-term jobs and that they drain local tax revenue through incentives. But supporters say these projects anchor high-tech investment, that they stabilize the tax base and help communities capture growth that they'd otherwise lose to other states. What do you make of that perspective?
Well, I think there are certain potential benefits there. They can bring in a lot of local tax revenue. Some, water systems have said that by getting a large customer, that's actually going to be better for other water ratepayers because it's going to distribute the cost of maintaining the system over a larger customer base. So, those are major things. They can also bring in a lot of jobs in the construction phase. Developers in Howell Township said that, this would bring in about 1,000 temporary construction jobs. Over the long term, though, it's really about the local tax revenues. We haven't really seen data centers so far bring in a lot of long-term jobs.
Brian Allnutt is a senior reporter and contributing editor at Planet Detroit. Brian, thank you so much for your reporting.
Thanks for having me.
It's the Metro on WDET. Coming up, America's foreign policy stances have changed a lot in the last decade. Are people happy with those changes? How do they want to see our country led? We'll find out next here on the Metro. Stay with us.